She walked into Morgan Enterprises determined to get the job. But for Emma Fields, this position was more than an opportunity. It was a crucial step in a dangerous plan. What no one knew, her true objective could bring down the entire Morgan family empire. The sound of heels echoed through the corridor on the 30th floor of the Morgan building. Emma Fields adjusted her black blazer one last time before pushing open the heavy glass door that led to the reception area of Morgan Enterprises. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her folder containing her resume as she walked up to the receptionist, who observed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Good morning, I'm Emma Fields. I have an interview scheduled with the Human Resources Department," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervousness that made her heart race. The receptionist consulted the computer for a few seconds before responding. "Yes, Miss Fields, please wait a moment." Emma sat in one of the leather armchairs in the reception area, discreetly observing her surroundings. Everything exuded power and sophistication, from the Italian marble floor to the contemporary artwork decorating the walls. It was exactly how she imagined the headquarters of one of the country's largest companies would be. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a middle-aged woman with perfectly arranged grey hair and a severe expression. "Miss Fields, please follow me." Emma followed the woman through a maze of corridors to a meeting room. To her surprise, in addition to the woman who had led her, there were 3 more people seated at the table, 2 men in suits and a young woman who couldn't stop taking notes on a tablet. "Miss Fields, I'm Margaret Olson, HR Director. These are Charles Martin, our Financial Manager, Peter Sanders, Legal Director, and Anna Lee, Executive Assistant." Emma greeted each of them with a professional smile while trying to understand why a simple interview for an executive secretary position required so many important people from the company. The interview began in a standard manner. Questions about her experience, academic background, and professional expectations. Emma answered each question with precision and confidence, years of preparation evident in every word chosen. That's when the door to the room opened without warning. Richard Morgan entered like a force of nature. Tall, with his well-lived 40-something years stamped on his striking face, the CEO of Morgan Enterprises had a presence that made any environment seem too small. His eyes, a deep brown, swept the room before fixing on Emma. "Sorry for the interruption," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "But I heard you were interviewing candidates for the position of my executive secretary and thought it appropriate to participate in the process." Emma felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. It wasn't in her plans to be interviewed by the CEO himself. In fact, the less contact she had with Richard Morgan, the better. "Miss Fields," Richard began, sitting at the head of the table, "I see in your resume that you worked for 5 years at Davies Corporation in London. Why did you decide to return to the United States?" Emma maintained a steady gaze even as she felt her heart rate quicken. "I thought it was time to return to my roots, Mr. Morgan. The United States is going through an interesting economic moment, and Morgan Enterprises is known for its international expansion. I thought my experience in the European market could be an advantage." Richard observed her for a few seconds in silence, as if trying to read beyond her words. Emma held his gaze, years of practice in maintaining composure, even in the tensest situations. "Interesting," he murmured, leafing through her resume. "Your references are impressive. Fluent in 4 languages, master's degree in international business. You seem overqualified for an executive secretary position, don't you think?" "I disagree, Mr. Morgan," Emma responded without hesitation. "An efficient executive secretary needs to be much more than a simple assistant. She needs to be a strategic partner, someone capable of anticipating needs and solving problems before they even arise. My education and experience allow me to do exactly that." A small smile appeared at the corner of Richard's lips. It was the first time someone had confronted him so elegantly in an interview. "And what about discretion, Miss Fields? How do you handle confidential information?" "Confidentiality is the basis of professional trust, Mr. Morgan. In my previous experience, I dealt daily with sensitive information about international mergers and acquisitions. My discretion was never questioned." Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something about this woman. a mixture of competence and mystery that intrigued him. She answered all questions with precision, but there were moments when she seemed to choose her words with almost excessive care. "Well, I believe I've seen enough," he declared, standing up. "Margaret, prepare the contract. Miss Fields starts on Monday." Emma blinked, surprised by the sudden decision. "Mr. Morgan, don't we need to discuss your benefits and salary?" he completed. "Margaret will take care of the details, but I can assure you they will be commensurate with your experience. Welcome to Morgan Enterprises, Miss Fields." With one last penetrating look in her direction, Richard left the room as abruptly as he had entered, leaving behind a silence charged with expectation. Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The first part of the plan was complete. She had gotten the job. Now came the hardest part, keeping her true intentions hidden while navigating the complex world of Richard Morgan. What no one in the room could imagine was that behind that facade of competent and reserved professional, Emma carried a secret that could shake the foundations not only of Morgan Enterprises, but of the lives of all involved. As she signed the preliminary documents that Margaret handed her, Emma thought about all the choices that had led her to this point. There was no turning back now. The game had begun, and she needed to play her part perfectly, even if it meant ignoring the inexplicable attraction she had felt when meeting Richard Morgan's eyes. Emma's first week at Morgan Enterprises passed like a whirlwind. She always arrived at 7 in the morning, an hour before necessary, and was the last to leave. Her efficiency impressed everyone, especially how she managed to anticipate Richard's needs before he even expressed them. "I've already separated the Asian branch reports that you'll need for the 9 o'clock video conference," Emma said, entering Richard's office with an organized folder and a cup of coffee prepared exactly as he liked it, strong, without sugar, with a pinch of cinnamon. Richard looked up from the documents he was analyzing, surprised. "How did you know I would need those reports? I don't remember mentioning." "You scheduled a meeting with the director of the Singapore branch. Considering the time difference and the history of topics discussed in the last 3 meetings, I deduced that the numbers from the last quarter would be relevant," she explained naturally. A discreet smile appeared on Richard's lips. In just 1 week, Emma had become indispensable. Her silent and efficient presence brought a new dynamic to the office, but there were moments when he noticed something more, small details that didn't fit perfectly. Like that morning, when he surprised her carefully observing the building plan fixed on the wall of the security room, or when he saw her quickly memorizing the safe code while he was typing it, thinking she was distracted with other documents. "Emma," he called, interrupting his thoughts. "I need you to organize a meeting with the board for next week. Topic: restructuring of the financial sector." She nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Any preference for time?" "Thursday, after lunch." "And Emma?" He paused, studying her reaction. "This is confidential. Only the board should know." "Of course, Mr. Morgan, confidentiality is my specialty." Something in the way she pronounced those words made Richard shiver internally. It was as if there were several layers of meaning in each phrase she uttered. The day went on normally until late afternoon, when Richard had to leave for an external meeting. Emma took the opportunity to organize some files in the system. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she navigated through folders and documents with surprising familiarity for someone so new to the company. Working late again. The voice of Anna Lee, the assistant who had participated in her interview, made her jump slightly. Emma quickly minimized the open windows on the computer. "Just organizing some files," she responded with a casual smile. "Mr. Morgan has a very particular classification system." Anna approached, leaning on the desk. "He is quite methodical, but you seem to have adapted incredibly quickly. It's almost as if you've known the company for years." Emma maintained her smile, but her eyes became alert. "I have a knack for adapting. Years of international experience help." "London, right?" "Funny, I have a cousin who worked at Davies Corporation at the same time as you, but she never mentioned—" "It's a big company," Emma cut in smoothly. "Not everyone knows each other. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish this before I go." Anna nodded, but her suspicious look remained. After she left, Emma let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She needed to be more careful. Curious people could be dangerous. The next morning, Richard arrived earlier than usual and found Emma already at her desk, apparently absorbed in an international call. "Yes, Mr. Patterson. I understand the concerns about the merger." She was speaking in impeccable British English, "but I can assure you that Mr. Morgan is fully committed to maintaining the current workforce structure." Richard frowned. He didn't remember authorizing any conversation about mergers with international partners. When Emma hung up, he cleared his throat to get her attention. "Any problem with the British?" "Oh, no, sir," she responded without hesitation. "Just a misunderstanding about the terms of the agreement you discussed last week. I've already clarified everything." Richard nodded slowly. He had discussed several agreements the previous week, but he was sure none of them involved labor issues with British companies. Before he could question further, Emma was already on her feet, handing him a folder. "Your schedule for today, sir. The first appointment is in 40 minutes, meeting with the legal department about the new environmental regulations." The way she changed the subject was subtle, almost imperceptible. It was like water slipping through fingers. The more Richard tried to understand certain inconsistencies in her actions, the more they seemed to dissipate into perfectly plausible explanations. During lunch, Richard found himself observing her through the window of his office. Emma was sitting alone in the cafe across the street, apparently focused on her cell phone. But something in her posture seemed different, more alert, tenser. Suddenly, she looked directly up, as if feeling his gaze. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Richard moved away from the window, disturbed by the intensity of that eye contact. In the afternoon, during a particularly tense meeting with investors, Richard noticed how Emma remained perfectly composed, taking notes and occasionally providing precise data that supported his arguments. But there were moments when she seemed to be paying attention to other things: the pattern of movement of the security guards in the corridor, the security cameras in the corners of the room, the exit routes. "Mr. Morgan?" Her voice brought him back to the present. "The investors are waiting for your decision on the Southern Branch project." Richard realized he had been distracted observing her. Something about that woman fascinated and worried him at the same time. It was as if she were a complex puzzle, where each piece that fit revealed 10 others that didn't make sense. At the end of the day, when everyone had already left, Richard found a document on his desk, a detailed report on possible vulnerabilities in the company's security system. He hadn't requested such an analysis, but upon reading it, he realized that the observations were pertinent and potentially crucial. "Emma," he called, but got no response. She had already left, silent as always. As he put the report in his briefcase, a photo fell from between the pages, old, slightly yellowed. It showed a group of executives in front of a corporate building. Richard recognized his father among them, much younger, next to a woman who strangely resembled— No, it couldn't be. The photo was at least 20 years old. He put the photograph in the locked drawer of his desk, determined to investigate it later. But an uncomfortable feeling accompanied him all the way home, the feeling that he was missing something important, something that was right in front of his eyes. What Richard didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Emma was in her small apartment, typing an encrypted report on a specially protected laptop. Phase 1 underway, access established, awaiting instructions for next step. Emma's reflection in the elevator mirror showed a perfectly composed woman in her navy blue dress, but inside she was restless. Her phone had vibrated 3 times during the morning, coded messages demanding faster results. She needed to accelerate the process, but Richard Morgan was proving more perceptive than anticipated. The elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, and she found the object of her concerns standing there, as if waiting for her. "Good morning, Miss Fields," Richard greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Could you accompany me to my office? We have some matters to discuss." Emma felt her heart rate quicken, but maintained a neutral expression. "Certainly, Mr. Morgan." As they entered the office, Richard closed the door, an unusual gesture that set off all of Emma's internal alarms. He walked to his desk and took something from the drawer, the old photograph she had purposely planted days ago. "I found this among some documents," he said, studying her reaction. "Curious, isn't it? This woman here has a remarkable resemblance to you." Emma approached, examining the photo with a look of polite interest. "Indeed, there is a resemblance. Who is she?" "She was an executive who worked with my father a long time ago. Amanda Turner." Richard paused significantly. "The interesting thing is that upon researching her, I discovered she mysteriously disappeared shortly after this photo was taken. And even more curious, she had a young daughter at the time." The silence that followed was as dense as fog. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the photograph, her mind working rapidly. "A sad story," she finally commented, "but I don't understand why you're showing me this, Mr. Morgan." Richard leaned over the desk, his penetrating eyes fixed on her. "Perhaps because since you arrived, I've noticed small inconsistencies, details that don't fit, like your surprisingly deep knowledge about the company's internal structure, or the way you occasionally look at my father's portrait with something that seems like recognition." Emma felt her hands go cold, but years of training kept her externally calm. "Are you suggesting something, Mr. Morgan?" "Not yet," he answered, leaning back in his chair. "But I'd like you to join me for dinner tonight to discuss company matters." The invitation caught her off guard. This was not part of the plan. Getting too close to Richard could complicate everything, but refusing could raise even more suspicions. "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Morgan. I'm your secretary." "And I'm your boss, asking for your presence at a business dinner," he countered smoothly. "Unless there's some other reason for your refusal?" Emma knew she was cornered. "What time should I be ready?" "I'll send my driver to pick you up at 8. For the rest of the day, Emma tried to focus on her work, but her mind was conflicted. She needed to maintain emotional distance, but something about Richard affected her in a way she hadn't anticipated. The way he looked at her, as if he could see through her carefully constructed defenses, destabilized her. At 7:30, in her apartment, Emma stared at her wardrobe with frustration. She finally chose an elegant but discreet black dress. As she applied red lipstick, her cell phone vibrated again. "Don't get emotionally involved. Keep focus on the mission." The message made her purse her lips, as if it were that simple. The restaurant chosen by Richard was exclusive and discreet, located on the top floor of one of the most elegant buildings in the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkled like earthly stars. "You look stunning," Richard commented as he pulled out the chair for her. "Thank you," Emma responded dryly, trying to maintain professionalism. The sommelier approached with a wine list, but Richard waved him off. "The usual, Gabriel, and bring a glass for Miss Fields as well." "How do you know I drink wine?" A small smile appeared on his lips. "You look like someone who appreciates a good Bordeaux." The wine arrived, a Chateau Margaux 1982. Emma couldn't help but give a look of genuine appreciation as she tasted the first glass. "Impressive," Richard observed. "Few people recognize a Margaux 82 just by taste." "My father," Emma began, then stopped abruptly. Another slip. More unplanned information. "Your father?" Richard encouraged, his eyes attentive to her every micro-expression. "He was a wine enthusiast," she completed vaguely. "He taught me a few things." "Was?" "I prefer not to talk about family, Mr. Morgan." Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "You know what's fascinating about you, Emma? The way you managed to say so much without revealing absolutely anything." Her heart raced. It was dangerous how he managed to get close to the truth even without realizing it. "Maybe I'm just a reserved person," she answered, taking another sip of wine to buy time. "Or maybe," he continued, his voice lowering a tone, "you're like me, someone who learned early on that trusting people can be dangerous." Those words hit her like a punch to the stomach. For the first time since she began her mission, Emma felt her mask falter. There was something in the way Richard looked at her, a mixture of understanding and loneliness that echoed deeply within her. The dinner proceeded with a conversation that danced between the professional and the personal, each testing the limits of the other. Richard told stories about building his empire, and Emma found herself genuinely fascinated by the passion with which he spoke about his projects. It was only when dessert arrived that she realized her mistake. She was relaxing, too much lowering her guard. The wine, the intimate atmosphere, Richard's magnetic presence, everything conspired to make her forget her true purpose there. "Dance with me?" he suddenly asked, indicating the small space where a few couples were moving to the sound of soft jazz. "I don't think that would be appropriate. Just one dance, Emma. Then I promise to go back to being just your boss." Against her better judgment, she accepted his outstretched hand. The moment their bodies came close, Emma knew she had made a mistake. Richard's physical proximity sent waves of electricity through her skin, making it difficult to keep her thoughts clear. "Why do you hide so much?" he murmured close to her ear. "We all have our secrets," she responded, her voice huskier than intended. "Yes, but yours seem to hurt you." Emma moved away slightly to look into his eyes, surprised by the insight of that observation. It was a mistake. The intensity of Richard's gaze captured her, and for a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, she allowed herself to imagine how it would be if everything were different. If she were just Emma, and he just Richard with no secrets or missions between them. The moment was broken by the insistent vibration of her phone. Reality came back with full force. "I need to go," she said, abruptly moving away. "Emma." Richard tried to hold her, but she was already heading for the exit. In the taxi on the way home, Emma tried to regain control of her emotions. Her phone vibrated again, another coded message. "Time running out, we need the documents by the end of the week." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her choices. How could she continue with the plan now that Richard was starting to mean more than he should? How could she betray him when every moment together made her question everything she believed in? In her apartment, Emma opened her laptop and began to type her daily report, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, her fingers lightly touched her lips, remembering the moment when she was so close to Richard that she could feel his breath. The sound of a notification brought her back to reality. It was an email from Richard. "Tonight's dinner made me realize there's much more to you than meets the eye, Emma. I don't know what your game is, but I intend to find out. The question is, are you going to tell me, or will I have to discover it on my own?" Emma stared at the screen, her heart torn between fear and something deeper, more dangerous. Richard was getting close to the truth, and she needed to quickly decide her next move. But for the first time since she accepted this mission, she wasn't sure if she could go ahead with the plan. Richard observed the city through the window of his office, his breakfast untouched on the table. He had spent the night awake, going through old folders and documents, searching for any connection between Amanda Turner and his mysterious secretary. "Mr. Morgan?" Emma's voice surprised him. She was standing at the door, professional as always, as if the previous night hadn't happened. "Your meeting with the board starts in 15 minutes. He turned to face her. Emma wore an elegant grey suit, hair tied, in a severe bun, the very image of business efficiency. But there was something different in her eyes today, a shadow he couldn't decipher. "Thank you, Emma. Please cancel my afternoon appointments. I have a personal matter to resolve." She nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Should I reschedule the video conference with the Chinese investors?" "Yes, for next week." He paused, studying her. "And Emma, that photo I found, I'd like you to research more about Amanda Turner, especially about her daughter." For a moment, so brief he might have imagined it, Richard saw a flash of panic in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Of course, Mr. Morgan, anything else?" "No, that's all." As soon as Emma left, Richard picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Charles, I need that favor you owe me. I want a complete investigation on Emma Fields and everything you can find about Amanda Turner and her family." On the other side of the door, Emma gripped her cell phone tightly, typing an urgent message. "He's investigating. We need to accelerate." The response came almost instantly. "Use Plan B tonight." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control her breathing. Plan B meant breaking into Richard's office at night, when the building would be practically empty. It was risky, but she had no choice. The day passed in silent tension. Emma performed her tasks with her usual efficiency, but her mind was focused on memorizing every detail of the security system, every guard's round, every camera. Richard, in turn, spent the afternoon in the company's dead file, located in the basement. Among piles of yellow documents, he found something that made his heart race, an old contract with Amanda Turner's signature. But it wasn't the document itself that caught his attention, but a handwritten note in the margin. "Phoenix. Project, destroy after completion." His suspicions increased when, upon returning to the office late in the afternoon, he found Emma apparently absorbed in a call in Mandarin. Her command of the language was impressive, but something in the conversation sounded artificial, as if she were following a script. "您确定这些文件已经被销毁了吗? Are you sure these documents have been destroyed?" she asked on the phone, not realizing that Richard understood Mandarin perfectly. He cleared his throat, making her startle slightly. Emma ended the call with a hasty goodbye. "I didn't know you spoke Mandarin so fluently," Richard commented casually. "I learned during my time in Asia," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "I was just confirming some details about the rescheduled video conference." Interesting, especially because the video conference is with our Hong Kong partners who prefer to conduct business in Cantonese. The silence that followed was as dense as lead. Emma maintained a neutral expression, but her hands trembled slightly as she organized some papers. "Mr. Morgan, if you'll excuse me, it's past 6. I need to go." Richard nodded, watching her hastily gather her things. When she was already at the door, he called, "Emma?" She turned, tense. "Yes? You look a lot like your mother." The sound of the folder falling from her hands echoed through the room. For a moment, Emma's mask of composure broke completely, revealing an expression of shock and vulnerability that confirmed all of Richard's suspicions. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to say, retrieving the folder with trembling hands. "I think you do. The question is, why is Amanda Turner's daughter working in my company under a false name?" Emma felt the world spin. It shouldn't be like this. Not now. Not when she was so close to getting what she needed. Her mind raced in search of a way out, but for the first time in years she couldn't think clearly. She began, but was interrupted by the shrill ring of Richard's phone. He answered without taking his eyes off her. "Morgan." "What?" "No. I didn't authorize any access to the main server. Block everything immediately." Emma took advantage of the distraction to quickly leave the room. In the elevator, her hands trembled as she typed a message. "Cover compromised, initiating contingency." In his office, Richard hung up the phone and punched the desk in frustration. The attack on the main server was obviously a distraction. But a distraction for what? The answer came like lightning, the photo. He ran to the drawer where he kept the old photograph, only to find it empty. In its place was a small piece of paper with a single handwritten sentence. "Not everything is as it seems, Richard. Some truths are more painful than lies." He immediately recognized the handwriting. It was identical to the note on the old contract he had found earlier. Amanda Turner's handwriting. Or was it Emma's? Meanwhile, in her apartment, Emma stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, cold water dripping from her face. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "One day you'll understand why we did all this." Her cell phone vibrated with a new message. "Time's up. Execute Plan B tonight, or we'll send someone else to finish the job." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of years of secrets and lies. Richard was right. She was indeed Amanda Turner's daughter, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. The complete truth was much more complex and dangerous. She took her laptop and began typing an email to Richard. Several times she started and erased, unable to find the right words. How to explain that each lie she told hid an even more painful truth? How to make him understand that her presence there wasn't just about revenge or justice, but about something much bigger? Finally, she wrote just 2 lines. "Meet me at midnight at the cafe where you used to watch me. I'll tell you everything." About Project Phoenix. She sent the email and immediately began her preparations. If she was going to reveal the truth to Richard, she would need to protect herself and him from the consequences that would come. Because one thing she had learned from her mother: in the world of the Morgans, secrets were more valuable than gold and more lethal than poison. The city seemed different at that hour of the night, as if it held its own secrets in the shadows between buildings. Richard arrived at the cafe 20 minutes before the scheduled time, choosing a table in the back where he could observe both the entrance and the street. The place was almost empty, just an elderly couple finishing their tea and a solitary man reading a newspaper at the counter. Richard ordered an espresso and waited, his fingers drumming restlessly on the wooden table. At 11:57 p.m., Emma entered. She looked different: jeans, black t-shirt, sneakers. Her loose hair framed a face without makeup, making her look younger and more vulnerable. But her eyes were alert, scanning the environment with military precision before heading to his table. "Did you come alone?" she asked, sitting down. "As you asked." Richard studied her carefully. "Now, how about we start with the truth?" Emma took a deep breath, her hands intertwining on the table. "Where do you want me to begin?" "From the beginning. Your real name is—" "Emma Turner," she completed. "Daughter of Amanda Turner and—" She hesitated for a moment. "Daniel Fields." Richard frowned. "The chief scientist of Project Phoenix? So you know about the project?" "Just the name, and that it was something my father developed with your mother 20 years ago. The records were destroyed." Emma let out a humorless laugh. "Not all of them. Some secrets are too big to be simply erased." The waitress approached, but Emma politely declined any order. Richard noticed how she kept one hand close to her bag, as if ready for something. "Project Phoenix," she continued in a low voice, "wasn't just another venture of Morgan Enterprises. It was an attempt to create something revolutionary, something that would change the business world forever." "What are you talking about?" "Artificial intelligence, Richard, but not just any AI, one capable of predicting and influencing global markets with near-perfect accuracy. Your father and my mother worked on it for years, developing algorithms that were decades ahead of their time." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. "Why have I never heard of this?" "Because it went wrong, or rather, it went too right." Emma leaned forward, lowering her voice even more. "When the first tests were successful, some powerful people showed interest. The kind of interest that comes with veiled threats and obscure promises." "What people?" "The kind that doesn't appear in official records. They wanted control of the project, wanted to use the technology to manipulate global markets, destabilize entire economies." Richard slowly processed the information. "And what happened?" "My mother and your father disagreed on how to proceed. Augustus Morgan wanted to sell. The price offered was astronomical. But my mother—" Emma closed her eyes for a moment, as if the memory was too painful. She knew it would be catastrophic to let that power fall into the wrong hands. "So she disappeared," Richard concluded. "She tried to destroy the project first. On the night, she vanished, she invaded the main servers and deleted years of research, but she couldn't get everything. What was left?" Emma looked around once more before answering. "A backup, on a special device, protected by an algorithm that can only be unlocked with a specific combination of data, part of it in Morgan Enterprises files, part in my family's possession. And that's why you're here, to complete your mother's work." "Not exactly." Emma hesitated, as if measuring each word. "I'm here because those people never gave up. They found my mother 2 years ago, Richard. And now—" A noise in the street made her stop abruptly. Through the window they saw a black car passing slowly. "We don't have much time," she continued. her voice now urgent. "They gave me an ultimatum. Either I get access to Morgan Enterprises files by the end of this week or what? Or my mother pays the price." Her eyes filled with unshed tears. "She's alive, Richard, but I don't know for how long." Richard instinctively reached out, covering her hand on the table. The contact sent an electric current through both of them. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I couldn't trust anyone. I didn't know whose side you were on. Your father." "My father what?" Before Emma could answer, her cell phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and paled. "We need to go, now." "What is it?" "They're here." Emma stood up abruptly. "Meet me tomorrow at Central Park, near the lake at 10. I'll show you something that will explain everything." "Emma, wait." But she was already heading quickly to the back exit. Richard threw some bills on the table and followed her, emerging into a dark alley. Emma had disappeared. Returning to his car, Richard tried to organize his thoughts. The story seemed too fantastic to be true, but it explained so many things. His father's strange behavior in the last years of his life, the mysterious investments, the destroyed documents. In her apartment, Emma was locking all doors and windows, her hands trembling slightly. Her cell phone vibrated again with a message. "You have 48 hours. After that, other methods will be necessary." She opened her laptop and typed a complex code, revealing a hidden folder. Inside was only one file, an old photo of two families, gathered at a barbecue, the Morgans and the Turners. In the photo, a young Emma smiled next to a young Richard, both oblivious to the fate that awaited them. "Forgive me, Richard," she murmured to the photo, "but there's more at stake than you. Imagine. Much more." In his office, Richard also couldn't sleep. Rummaging through old folders of his father, he found something that made him freeze, a sealed envelope with his name, and below, handwritten, "Open only when the Phoenix returns." It's in wine. Hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was just a flash drive and a note. "Son, if you're reading this, it means she's back, and with her, all our sins from the past. Trust your heart, but protect the legacy. Not everything is as it seems. P.S. The code is the date when you and Emma first met." Richard stared at the flash drive in his hands, his mind trying to process his father's words. The date when he and Emma first met? But that had been just a few weeks ago, unless a distant memory began to emerge, a summer barbecue, children's laughter, the scent of jasmine flowers. He was only 8 years old, and there was a girl with braids who wouldn't leave his side, always carrying a storybook. "Emma," he murmured, the revelation hitting him like a wave. It wasn't the first time they had met. It was the first time they had reunited. His hands trembled as he connected the flash drive to the computer. On the screen, a single folder appeared, protected by a password. Richard closed his eyes, trying to remember the exact date of that barbecue. November 15th. But what year? His cell phone vibrated. A message from Emma. "Be careful with what you'll find on that flash drive. Some truths can hurt more than lies." How did she know? Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. He typed the first date that came to mind. 11/15/1995, access denied. 11/15/1996. The screen flickered and a series of files began to open automatically. Videos, documents, photos. 2 decades of secrets carefully preserved by his father. The first video showed a conference room. Richard recognized his father, younger, next to Amanda Turner and Daniel Fields. They were excited, celebrating something. "We did it!" Amanda's voice sounded through the speaker. The algorithm worked perfectly. The Asian market prediction was exact down to the last decimal. "This will change everything," Daniel added, hugging Amanda. "Imagine the possibilities." "We need to be careful," Augustus Morgan's voice interrupted. "There are a lot of people eyeing this technology. The consortium has made contact 3 times this week." Richard paused the video, his mind processing the information. The consortium? He had heard that name before, whispered in tense board meetings. His phone rang, startling him. It was an unknown number. "Mr. Morgan?" A male voice, deep. "I suggest you stop exploring certain files. Some doors are better left closed." The call dropped. Richard felt his heart rate accelerate. Quickly, he copied all the files from the flash, drive to a secure device and hid it. It was almost 3 in the morning when the doorbell of his apartment rang. Through the peephole, he saw Emma, pale, breathless. "They're coming," she said as soon as he opened the door. "We need to go, now." "Who's coming?" "The consortium. They tracked the access to your father's files. They know you opened the flash. Drive." Richard realized she was trembling. Without thinking, he pulled her inside and hugged her. Emma tensed for a moment before relaxing in his arms, as if finally finding a safe harbor. "I'm sorry," she murmured against his chest. "I never wanted to involve you in this, but now we're in this together," he completed, moving away just enough to look into her eyes. "Emma, I remember you. From the barbecue, from the storybook." A small, sad smile appeared on her lips. "The Little Mermaid. You said it was a silly book, but you still sat with me to read it. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because the less you knew, the safer you'd be. But now..." She stepped back, running her hands over her face. "We need to get that secure device and get out of here. There's a place where we can hide, but we have to..." The sound of glass breaking in the hallway interrupted her. Emma reacted instantly, pulling Richard towards the office. "Is there an emergency exit?" "Through the fire escape, but..." "Go," she ordered, taking something from her bag. It looked like a small electronic device. "I'll delay them." "I'm not leaving you here." Emma held his face between her hands. "Richard, listen. I know I have no right to ask for your trust after all the lies, but I need you to trust me now. Go to the old cafe on Flower Street. Order a jasmine tea and sit at table 15. Someone will meet you." "Emma." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Emma did something that surprised them both. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, a quick kiss but loaded with unspoken promises. "Go," she whispered against his lips. "I promise I'll find you." Richard hesitated for a second before running to the emergency staircase. The last glimpse he had of Emma was of her typing something on the small device, a determined expression on her face. He descended the stairs as silently as possible, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the street, he heard a series of pops coming from his apartment, followed by a blue flash. He wanted to go back, but Emma's words echoed in his mind. Trust. After all the lies, all the secrets, why did he still trust her? The answer came with crystal clarity as he ran through the night. Because despite all the masks and disguises, his heart recognized the truth in her eyes. The girl from the storybook was still there, now fighting against forces much bigger than them. In his pocket, the secure device weighed like lead. Whatever was stored there, powerful people were willing to do anything to get it. And somewhere in the city, Amanda Turner was waiting, her life depending on the next decisions they would make. Richard hailed a taxi and gave the address of the cafe. As the car wound through the empty streets of the early morning, he opened the only message Emma had managed to send before chaos began. "If something goes wrong, look for the Phoenix where the stories began. And Richard, I'm sorry for everything, but mostly, I'm sorry for falling in love with you again." He closed, his eyes letting the words sink into his soul. When he opened them again, a new determination filled him. He would find the answers, save Amanda, and above all, bring Emma back. Because some stories deserve a happy ending, even if the path there is paved with secrets and dangers. The old cafe seemed frozen in time, with its dark wood tables and vintage chairs. At 4 in the morning, the place was practically deserted, except for a sleepy barista and a couple of students hunched over laptops. Richard found table 15 in a discreet corner, partially hidden by a huge fern. He ordered the jasmine tea as Emma had instructed and waited, his fingers nervously tapping on the table. The sweet aroma of jasmine brought more memories. Summer afternoons in the Morgan garden, Emma reading to him under the pergola covered with the same flower. How could he have forgotten? The Jasmines were your mother's idea, a familiar voice brought him back to the present. Elena Morgan always said they brought peace in difficult times. Richard looked up and his heart nearly stopped. Standing before him was Daniel Fields, Emma's father, who everyone believed had disappeared years ago. Professor Fields? It's been a long time, Richard. Daniel sat down, his tired eyes studying the young businessman's face. You look a lot like your father. Where's Emma? Safe, for now. She managed to throw the consortium off track using an interference device we developed, but we don't have much time. Richard leaned forward. What exactly is the consortium, and why are they after a 20-year-old project? Daniel took a sip of the coffee the barista had just brought. Project Phoenix was never just about market prediction, Richard. It was much more. Imagine a system capable not only of predicting the future, but of shaping it, of identifying the small pressure points that, when manipulated correctly, can change the destiny of entire nations. That sounds dangerous. It is. That's why Amanda and I decided to destroy it. But your father... Daniel paused, choosing his words. Augustus believed we could control the power of the project, use it for good. And couldn't you? Too much power in the hands of a few never ends well. The consortium is proof of that. A group of rich and influential people who believe they have the right to shape the world according to their vision. Richard slowly processed the information. But if you destroyed the project, we destroyed most of it. But the core code, the heart of the algorithm, was divided into 3 parts. Your family has one, my family has another, and the third is with the consortium, Emma completed, silently appearing beside the table. Richard stood up instinctively, his eyes examining her for injuries. She looked exhausted, but unharmed. You shouldn't be here, Daniel warned, but there was a proud smile in his eyes. Change of plans. Emma sat down, her leg lightly brushing against Richard's under the table. They found Mom. Daniel paled. How? Someone inside Morgan Enterprises is working for them. They leaked information about the backup we kept hidden. Richard felt his blood run cold. Inside my company? Who? We don't know yet, Emma replied, her eyes meeting his. But whoever it is, they have access to the top echelon. The messages I intercepted... A sudden movement on the street made her stop. Through the window, they saw 3 men in suits getting out of a black car. Damn, Daniel muttered. They tracked us. The kitchen has an exit to the alley, Emma said, already standing. Let's go. But before they could move, the men entered the cafe. One of them, tall with graying hair and a predatory smile, walked directly to their table. Dr. Fields, what a pleasure to see you again. His voice was smooth as velvet. Miss Turner, or do you prefer Fields? And Richard Morgan. The whole family reunited, how touching. Alexander, Daniel greeted coldly. Still doing the consortium's dirty work? Just ensuring our associates' interests. Alexander sat down casually. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Where's the device? Richard felt Emma tense beside him. Under the table, she slipped something into his pocket, a small key. What device? Daniel asked innocently. Don't play with me, Daniel. We know Amanda hid a complete backup of Project Phoenix before disappearing, and we know she would only trust it to you or your lovely daughter. Even if such a backup existed, Emma intervened, her voice firm, why do you think we'd hand it over to you? Alexander smiled, taking out his phone. After a few taps, he turned the screen towards them. The video showed Amanda Turner in a well-lit room reading today's newspaper. Because, dear, your mother is counting on it, and you have, he consulted his gold watch, approximately 12 hours before my superiors lose patience. Richard observed Emma and Daniel exchange a significant look. There was something there, a silent communication he couldn't decipher. We need guarantees, Daniel finally said. Naturally. How about a meeting? Amanda is eager to see the family again. Bring the device to the old laboratory at midnight. No tricks, no police. How do we know she'll be there? Emma asked. Alexander stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit. You don't, but do you have a choice? After he and his men left, a heavy silence fell over the table. We can't hand over the project to them, Emma whispered. We can't abandon. To your mother, Daniel responded. Richard, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. What if we didn't have to do either? Father and daughter turned to him. The key you put in my pocket, he continued, looking at Emma. It's for the safe in the library of the Morgan mansion, isn't it, where everything began? A small smile appeared on her lips. Where the stories began, she quoted her own message. But we need access to the company's main system, Daniel pondered. If there really is an informant. Leave that to me, Richard declared. I have an idea, but I'll need help. Emma, I'll be there, she completed, her eyes shining with determination. Daniel observed the exchange with a mixture of concern and resignation. As your father used to say, Richard, sometimes we need to break the system to fix it. And sometimes, Emma added softly, her hand finding Richard's under the table, we need to trust our hearts to find the right path. As the sun began to rise over the city, 3 figures left the cafe separately, each with a specific mission. The final game was about to begin, and the next 12 hours would determine not only the fate of Project Phoenix, but the future of all of them. In his coat pocket, Richard squeezed the small key. Whatever was stored in the library safe, one thing he knew for certain. He wouldn't let Emma face this alone. Not again. The Morgan mansion cast long shadows across the garden as the morning sun rose on the horizon. Richard paused for a moment. In front of the jasmine-covered pergola, memories of his childhood mingling with the urgency of the present. The security guards make their rounds every 15 minutes, Emma whispered beside him, checking her watch. We have a 3-minute window to enter unseen. He nodded, guiding her along a side path that few knew about. My mother used to use this entrance to tend the garden without being disturbed. The old service door was hidden behind dense vines. Richard entered a code on the discreet panel, and the door opened silently. How did you know the code would still work? Emma asked as they slipped inside. Some things never change in this house. My mother... He hesitated, a sad smile on his lips. She programmed this code with the date of the first barbecue where our families gathered. Emma paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his in the dim hallway. She knew. I think she knew a lot more than she let on. They moved silently through the house until they reached the library. The room was immense, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a circular staircase leading to a mezzanine. The smell of old books and polished wood brought more memories. Study afternoons, laughter hidden between the shelves, a small Emma trying to reach books too high for her age. The safe is behind that panel, Richard indicated, moving towards a section of carved wood. Emma examined the mechanism with expert eyes. Old system. Your father never updated it? Maybe he wanted to keep something that couldn't be hacked. While Emma worked on the safe, Richard checked his cell phone. A message from Daniel. Position established. CM confirmed. Charles Martin, Emma murmured, reading the message over his shoulder. The financial manager. He's the consortium's informant. How are you sure? I intercepted communications from him in recent weeks, but we needed confirmation before acting. A soft click indicated that the safe was open. Inside, they found an old metal box and a yellowed envelope. The box contains the fragment of the code that your family guards, Emma explained, carefully picking it up. But we need the part that's on the company's main server to... A noise in the hallway interrupted her. Voices were approaching. Quick, Richard whispered, pulling her behind a bookshelf. The next moment, the library door opened. Are you sure they would come here? Charles Martin's voice echoed through the room. The mansion is the obvious place, Alexander replied. Search everything. They have to be somewhere. Emma and Richard exchanged glances. They were cornered, with only one possible exit, the mezzanine that led to the winter garden. With silent gestures, they began to move between the shelves, climbing the circular staircase as quietly as possible. Emma carried the box close to her chest, while Richard held the envelope. From the mezzanine, they could see the consortium men methodically searching the library. Charles Martin seemed nervous, constantly checking his cell phone. It's not here, one of the men reported after a few minutes. Alexander let out an irritated sigh. Keep looking. They can't have gone far. When the men moved to another part of the library, Richard and Emma seized the opportunity. With movements practiced over years of climbing, Emma began to descend the ivy-covered trellis that led to the winter garden. Richard followed her, the envelope secure in his pocket. They were almost reaching the ground when his foot slipped, knocking over a flower pot. The noise immediately attracted attention. "There!" someone shouted. "Run!" Emma ordered as soon as they touched the ground. They dashed through the winter garden, the sound of footsteps pursuing them. Emma led the way confidently, as if she knew every inch of the terrain. This way, she indicated, diving into a passage between the greenhouses. They were emerging at the back of the property when the first shot hit the wall beside them. Emma didn't hesitate. She pulled Richard behind a large marble statue. "We need to separate," she said, breathless. "You go to the company. Use your authorization to access the main server. I'll take the box another way. I'm not going to leave." "You..." "Richard," she held his face between her hands. "Trust me. We'll meet at the place we arranged with my father. 1 hour." Before he could protest, she kissed him, quick, intense, desperate. "If something goes wrong..." "It won't," he interrupted. "Her. Not this time." More shots made them duck. Emma took advantage of the cover from the smoke of gas bombs that the pursuers were starting to throw. 1 hour, she repeated, and then disappeared among the orchard trees. Richard ran in the opposite direction, zigzagging between the garden sculptures. He managed to reach the side wall and jumped, rolling onto the neighbor's lawn. His heart was beating frantically as he ran through the streets of the upscale neighborhood, but it wasn't just because of the chase. Emma's kiss still burned on his lips, along with the fear that it might be the last. In his pocket, his father's envelope seemed to weigh a ton. Inside, he would discover later, there were not only instructions about the server, but also a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about Project Phoenix. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Emma was racing against time, the metal box secure in her backpack. Her cell phone vibrated with a coded message. "Package in motion. Mum is being transferred. We have less time than we thought." She quickened her pace, her thoughts divided between the mission and Richard. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel hope, not just of saving her mother, but of having a future beyond secrets and escapes. But first, they needed to survive the next few hours. And the clock kept ticking. Morgan Enterprises looked different that morning, darker, more threatening. Richard entered through the garage, using his private key to avoid the main lobby. His heart was still racing from the run, but his mind was focused on the mission. In the service elevator, he finally opened his father's envelope. Inside, besides an old access card, there was a handwritten letter. "My son, if you're reading this, it means the past has finally caught up with us. Project Phoenix was never just about predicting markets. It was about predicting the future of humanity. The algorithm we created had the power to calculate and influence not just economics, but human decisions on a large scale." Amanda and Daniel saw the danger first. I, blinded by ambition and power, took too long to understand. When I finally realized what the consortium planned to do with our creation, it was too late. Amanda's disappearance wasn't accidental. I helped her escape, hide the code. It was the only thing I could do to try to fix my mistakes, but the consortium never gave up. The true key to Project Phoenix isn't in the servers or the code fragments. It's in the DNA of the two families that created it. The algorithm was programmed to respond only to a specific sequence that combines biometric data from the Morgans and the Turners. Richard, you and Emma are the key. You always have been. That's why we made sure you met as children, that you created a bond. Your destinies were intertwined before you were even born. Protect Emma, protect Amanda, and above all, protect the future we fought to preserve. With love, your father. P.S. Access to the main server requires dual authentication. Use the card along with the code, Elena 15111, your mother's name and the date she made me promise to protect the children, no matter the cost. Richard read the letter twice, his hands trembling. So many pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together, the seemingly casual encounters in childhood, the consortium's interest in them, the way he and Emma seemed to naturally gravitate towards each other. His phone vibrated, a message from Emma. "I'm in position." Tim confirmed A's location, awaiting signal. He reached the executive floor, which was deserted at this early hour on a Saturday morning. Using his father's card, he accessed the server room. The main system was a relic purposely kept isolated from modern networks, impossible to hack remotely. As he entered the code left by his father, another text from Emma arrived. "Be careful, CM is coming up. Charles Martin." The traitor was coming. Richard worked quickly, his hands flying over the keyboard as he accessed files deeply buried in the system. A folder named Project P appeared, protected by another layer of passwords. The sound of the elevator arriving made him hurry. He typed the last sequence of commands and initiated the transfer of data to a special device Emma had given him. The server room door opened. "I should have known I'd find you here," Charles's voice sounded. Behind him, Richard turned slowly. His financial manager was pointing a gun at him. "Why, Charles? For money?" "You don't understand, do you?" Charles took a step forward. "Some people were born to rule, others to be ruled. The consortium is just restoring the natural order of things by manipulating humanity's future, guiding it. With Project Phoenix, we can create a truly ordered, predictable world. A world without free will." A new voice entered the conversation. Emma was standing at the door, a gun pointed at Charles. "Lower the weapon," Charles laughed. "You really think you can stop this? The consortium has already won. At this very moment, your mother is being transferred to a location where you'll never find her." "Are you sure?" Emma smiled, a smile Richard had never seen before, cold, calculated. She tossed her phone for Charles to see the screen. It was a live transmission. Amanda Turner, accompanied by Daniel Fields and several federal agents, was being escorted out of an industrial complex. "How?" "You're not the only one who knows how to plant informants, Charles. The consortium has had an infiltrator for years. My Aunt Elena, the same Elena who married one of your high-ranking executives." Charles's face paled. "Impossible." "Game over," Richard declared. At the exact moment, the data transfer completed with a soft beep. What happened next was too fast to process completely. Charles tried to shoot, but Emma was faster. A precise shot hit the hand holding the gun, making him drop the pistol. Seconds later, federal agents stormed the room. Charles was immobilized and handcuffed, shouting threats and promises of revenge. Emma ran to Richard, her hands frantically checking if he was injured. "Are you okay? Did you get the data?" He nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Your mother?" "Safe. The plan worked, using the transfer as a distraction while my father's team rescued her from the real location. And the consortium. Being dismantled as we speak. Years of investigation finally bearing fruit." She moved away just enough to look into his eyes. "But it's not over yet. We need to complete the destruction protocol for Project Phoenix." Richard took out the device with the data. "I have something to tell you about us, about why we met as children." "I know," she interrupted him softly. "I always knew. Mom told me everything before sending me on this mission. And even so, I fell in love with you. Again." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Some things are bigger than fate or algorithms, Richard. Some things are simply right." The sound of a helicopter cut through the moment. Alexander and his men had arrived at the building. "Let's go," Emma took his hand. "We have one last thing to do." As they ran towards the helipad, where Daniel was waiting for them with transport, Richard squeezed Emma's hand. No matter what came next, facing the consortium, destroying the project, rebuilding their lives, they would do it together. Because some stories are written in the stars, others are programmed in algorithms, but the best are written in the heart. The wind on the Morgan Enterprises helipad was cutting, whipping Emma's hair as she and Richard ran towards the helicopter where Daniel was waiting. The sound of the blades almost drowned out the noise. of the access door violently opening behind them. "It's over, Alexander," Emma shouted, turning to face the man emerging onto the helipad, followed by his last loyal men. "The consortium is being dismantled as we speak." Alexander smiled, that cold, calculating smile that had haunted the Turner family for so long. "You really think the consortium is just an organization that can be taken apart? We are an idea, a vision of the future. And as long as Project Phoenix exists, there will always be someone willing to fight for it. That's why we're going to destroy it," Richard declared, his voice firm despite the howling wind. "Completely this time. Don't you understand?" Alexander stepped forward, his eyes shining with an almost feverish intensity. "The project is perfect. With it, we could eliminate chaos, create a truly ordered world. Think of the possibilities." "I thought." A new voice joined the conversation. Amanda Turner emerged from the helicopter, her graying hair dancing in the wind. "I thought for 20 years, Alexander. And you know what I discovered? That chaos isn't our enemy. It's our salvation. It's what makes us human." Emma felt tears, in her eyes seeing her mother, no longer the frightened prisoner from the video, but the brilliant and determined scientist she had always known. "The algorithm worked better than we expected," Amanda continued. "So well that we realized no one should have this kind of power, not even us. So that's it?" Alexander drew a gun. "You're going to throw away the work of a lifetime, the future of humanity?" "No," Richard stepped forward, placing himself between Alexander and the women. "We're going to preserve humanity's future. We're going to let it free to choose its own path." At this moment, several things happened simultaneously. Alexander fired, but Richard was already moving, pulling Emma behind a metal structure. Daniel appeared with a team of federal agents, emerging from another approaching helicopter. "Now, Emma!" Amanda shouted. Emma took the device with the server data, combining it with the box she was carrying. Amanda added her own component, the final fragment of the code. Together, mother and daughter initiated the destruction sequence they had planned for so long. "No!" Alexander lunged forward, but was restrained by the agents. A blue light emanated from the combined device, growing in intensity until it became almost blinding. Years of research, codes, and power being transformed into nothing more than corrupted data and burned circuits. When the light dissipated, Emma looked at Richard. He was bleeding from a superficial wound on his arm, but his eyes shone with something she immediately recognized: love, pure and simple, without algorithms or programmed destinies. "It's over," she whispered, finally letting the tears fall. "No," he smiled, pulling her into his arms. "It's just beginning." 3 months later, the garden of the Morgan mansion was in full bloom, jasmines perfuming the afternoon air. In the same place where two families had gathered decades ago, a new celebration was underway. Emma, wearing a simple summer dress, watched Richard tell the story of how they met as children to a group of fascinated guests. Her mother and father were seated nearby, their hands intertwined, finally reunited after so long. The consortium had been officially dismantled, its leaders imprisoned or on the run. Alexander would face years in prison, along with Charles Martin and other conspirators, but that wasn't the story that mattered today. The real story was in the small moments, in the way Richard always found her hand in a crowd, in her mother's smile as she worked in the garden that Elena Morgan had loved so much, in her father's laughter, as he rediscovered life beyond codes and algorithms. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, approaching from behind and wrapping his arms around her. "About how some things are bigger than destiny or programming," she replied, turning to face him. "About how I chose to love you, even when I thought it was impossible. And I chose to trust you even when everything indicated I shouldn't," he completed, touching his forehead to hers. In the center of the garden, Daniel had started playing guitar, the same song he had played at that first barbecue so many years ago. Amanda joined him, her soft voice carrying memories and promises. "Want to dance?" Richard asked, extending his hand. Emma smiled, accepting the invitation. As they danced under the jasmine-covered pergola, she thought about all the choices that had brought them here. every decision, every moment of doubt and courage, every time they chose love instead of fear. Project Phoenix had tried to create a predictable, controlled future, but the real magic they discovered was precisely in the uncertainty, in the unplanned moments, in the surprises of destiny, in the free will that made each choice meaningful. "I love you," Emma whispered, the words coming naturally without planning or calculation. "I love you," Richard responded, and it was all that needed to be said. Above them, the sky was beginning to tinge with the colors of sunset. A new day was ending, and with it a story was coming to a close. But like every good love story, it was also a beginning, of infinite possibilities, of unwritten futures, of choices yet to be made. Because in the end, they discovered that the greatest power wasn't in predicting or controlling the future, but in having the courage to live it, one day at a time, together. And so, under a sky painted pink and gold, two families once divided by secrets celebrated not just a union, but a universal truth, that love in its glorious unpredictability is the most powerful algorithm of all.